The first time the Bobcat appeared outside room 214, nobody at the Pine Ridge Motor Lodge paid much attention. It was the kind of roadside motel people used because they had to, not because they wanted to. A long two-story building stretched in an L shape around a cracked parking lot, with faded blue doors, rusting railings, and a flickering vacancy sign that buzzed all night like a tired insect. Truckers stopped there when the highway became too dark to drive. Divorced fathers stayed there on weekends when they came through town. Construction crews rented blocks of rooms by the week. Families with more miles left than money slept there for one night and were gone before breakfast. It sat on the edge of Alder Creek, where pine forest pressed close behind the property line, and coyotes could sometimes be heard after midnight if the traffic died down. By late autumn, tourist season was long over. The pool had been drained. The flower boxes outside the office were empty. Wind sent dry leaves skittering across the concrete walkways in thin scraping bursts. The motel was half full that week, mostly with workers and two elderly couples traveling south before the first snow. Nina Alvarez was on the evening shift when the front desk phone rang just after 7:30. She was 31, practical, underpaid, and good at noticing the difference between a real problem and the sort of complaint people invented because they were lonely or bored. In 2 years at Pine Ridge, she had handled clogged toilets, broken remotes, one drunk guest who insisted there was a ghost in his bathroom mirror, and a raccoon that somehow got into the ice machine enclosure. Her threshold for alarm was reasonably high, so when the guest in room 214 said, there's some kind of wild cat sitting in the stairwell again?" Nina almost laughed. "Again?" she asked, already pulling up the reservation. "Yeah," the man said. "I saw it out there last night, too. I thought maybe I imagined it. But it's back." Nina glanced through the office window toward the exterior stairs at the far corner of the building. From that distance, she saw only yellow security light, metal shadows, and a wind-tossed plastic bag catching on the chain-link fence. "It might be a stray," she said. "Please don't approach it. I'll take a look." The guest hesitated. "It's not acting normal." That made her pause. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. Nina zipped her jacket to the chin and crossed the parking lot with a flashlight in one hand, and the kind of resigned caution service workers develop after too many strange evenings. The stairwell in question connected the second-floor walkway to the far end of the lot, near a soda vending machine and an old ice dispenser built into a cinder block alcove. The area stayed darker than the rest of the property because one overhead light had burned out 3 weeks earlier and the owner still hadn't replaced it. At first, Nina saw nothing. Then two eyes flashed in her beam. A bobcat stood halfway up the stairs. Not large, but fully wild-looking, with tufted ears, a spotted tawny coat, and a muscular stillness that made Nina stop so abruptly her shoes scraped the concrete. It was facing down toward the vending machine alcove, not toward her. When the flashlight hit it, the cat turned its head. Its face was narrow and tense. One forepaw lifted and set down again. It did not arch or hiss or run. It simply looked at Nina for one taut second, then dropped back down the steps and vanished behind the vending machine. Nina stayed rooted where she was, heart hammering hard enough to make her throat feel tight. There were bobcats in the area, of course. Everyone who lived near the forest knew that. Usually they stayed well away from people. Sometimes someone spotted one crossing a road at dawn or slipping between tree lines at dusk. But one returning to the same motel stairwell 2 nights in a row was another matter. By the time she got back to the office, the guest from 214 was waiting outside his door in socks and a flannel shirt, peering over the railing with the worried fascination of a man who badly wanted the story to be interesting but not dangerous. His name was Tom Weller, according to the registry, and he looked exactly like that name should look. Late 40s, tired eyes, ball cap, traveling salesman's overnight bag, still unopened on the bed behind him. "You saw it," he called. "I saw it," Nina said. "Told you." She nodded, still looking toward the stairwell. "Stay inside tonight. Don't leave food out. If you need ice, wait till morning." Tom folded his arms over the railing. "You calling animal control?" "In the morning, yes." He frowned. "What if it comes back tonight?" Nina wanted to say, "Then don't go near the stairs." Instead, she said, "Then call me." The bobcat came back less than an hour later. This time, 3 guests saw it, a young couple carrying takeout. One of the construction workers from room 117, Nina herself from behind the office glass. Always the same pattern. The animal approached from the dark strip of brush beyond the back fence, slipped through the gap where the chain link had bent upward, crossed the corner of the lot, and disappeared into the stairwell alcove beside the vending machine. It never lingered anywhere else. It did not beg. It did not scavenge near the dumpsters. It did not stalk the stray cats that sometimes skirted the property. It went only to that one place. Nina called County Animal Services and left an urgent message. Then the power blinked. Not off completely, just one of those quick roadside facility stutters where every light dips, hums, and recovers. But in the second the lights went dim, a sound drifted across the lot. A metallic rattle, then silence. Tom Weller heard it from his room and came back out, ignoring Nina's pointed instruction to stay inside. "That didn't sound like the cat," he said. "You don't know what a cat sounds like in a stairwell," Nina snapped, more sharply than she intended. Tom kept looking toward the darkness near the vending machine. "No," he said. "That sounded like something moving behind it." Nina turned to answer him, but he had already started down the walkway. "Sir," she said. He stopped, but only barely. "If something's trapped back there, you are not going near a bobcat in the dark." Tom rubbed one hand over his mouth, thinking, "Fine, but I'm telling you, it's not just hanging around. It wants something over there." Nina hated that he might be right. County Animal Control could not come until morning unless there was immediate danger to a person. The sheriff's office told her to keep guests clear of the area. She did her best. She blocked the stairwell with a luggage cart and 2 plastic caution signs from the laundry room. She moved one couple from room 211 to the opposite side of the property. She told everyone on the second floor to use the central stairs only. Most listened. Tom remained restless, suspicious, and annoyingly alert. Around 10:30, the motel quieted. Television light flickered through curtains. Truck engines idled once, then died. Wind moved through the pines beyond the fence with a dry, rushing hiss. Nina sat behind the front desk with the monitor feed from the parking lot on the tiny security screen in front of her. At 10:47 p.m., the bobcat returned. It came out of the dark so silently the camera almost missed it. 1 second nothing, the next a low, pale shape crossing the edge of the lot. It slipped beneath the caution tape, trotted to the stairwell, and vanished behind the vending machine. Then it stayed there. Nina leaned closer to the monitor. A few seconds later, the cat reappeared in profile, pacing. It moved 2 steps away from the vending machine, then back, away, then back. Then it rose briefly onto its hind legs and braced its front paws against the metal side panel. Nina stood up so fast her chair hit the wall. Before she could decide what to do, the office bell over the door jingled, and Tom Weller stepped inside wearing jeans, boots, and the expression of a man who had made up his mind to be unhelpful in the most determined way possible. "I heard it again," he said. Nina grabbed the flashlight. "You stay here." "No." She gave him a long stare. "Do you make a hobby of ignoring women with better judgment?" "Only when I think they're about to go look behind a vending machine where a bobcat keeps showing up." It was a terrible argument, but not an incorrect one. So they went together, staying several yards apart, each carrying a flashlight. Nina had also taken the long-handled broom from the utility closet, which made her feel ridiculous but slightly braver. The parking lot felt colder now, emptier, the sort of emptiness that makes every sound seem deliberate. Gravel shifted under their shoes. Somewhere a truck on the highway downshifted with a far-off growl. The motel sign buzzed and clicked overhead. They reached the bottom of the block stairwell and stopped. The bobcat was there. It stood in the narrow gap between the vending machine and the cinder block wall, half-shadowed, body low, eyes reflecting white in the flashlight beams. But again, its attention was not on them. It kept turning its head toward the darkness behind the machine. Then it looked back at Nina and Tom, then back again. Tom swallowed. "You seeing this?" "I'm seeing it." There was a smell there Nina hadn't noticed before. Not the usual stale mix of wet concrete, motor oil, and sugary soda syrup, something warmer, sour, animal. Dust and breath and something like damp fur trapped too long in a closed place. Then came the sound. Very faint. A rasping inhale. Tom's whole body stiffened. "That's breathing." Nina's skin went cold. Not the bobcats breathing. Something behind the vending machine. Something alive. The bobcat let out a short, rough cry and struck the metal side of the machine once with its paw. The clang made Nina flinch. Then the animal stepped back, almost as if making room. Tom looked at her. She looked at him. For the first time, neither of them spoke. The vending machine sat an inch or two off the wall, but there was a deeper cavity behind it because the alcove had originally housed a larger ice dispenser years earlier. The current machine had been pushed in front of the opening, leaving a narrow shadowed space full of dust, dead leaves, and forgotten utility lines. Enough room, Nina realized with a spike of horror, for something small to crawl into and become trapped. She backed away at once and called 911. This time she did not say bobcat. She said possible trapped animal, possible danger, unknown condition, and breathing behind a vending machine with a wild predator refusing to leave the area. That combination apparently crossed some threshold. Within minutes, a deputy, animal services officer, and volunteer fire unit were on the way. While they waited, the bobcat did not run. That more than anything unnerved Nina. It paced, crouched, stared, and once darted toward the gap so fast Tom recoiled into the stair rail. But it always came back to the same position near the machine, not defensive of territory, but fixed on the hidden space behind it. When Nina and Tom retreated to a safer distance, it moved closer to the wall and made that same low, broken sound again. "It's trying to show us," Tom said. Nina would have rolled her eyes on any other night. Instead, she said nothing. Deputy Aaron Pike arrived first, a broad-shouldered man with a flashlight brighter than both of theirs combined, and the patient expression of someone expecting nonsense until proven otherwise. He was still halfway through asking, "So what exactly are we dealing with?" When he heard the breathing, his voice changed immediately. A county animal services SUV pulled in behind him. Officer Marcy Dell stepped out carrying a catch pole, a transport crate, and the air of someone who had worked with frightened wildlife long enough to recognize panic in any species. She took one look at the bobcat and lowered her posture instinctively. "Don't crowd it," she said. "It's stressed but not posturing. That means its focus is somewhere else." "Behind the machine," Nina said. Marcy nodded. "I figured." The volunteer fire crew arrived with a dolly, pry bar, and work lights. The motel owner, finally answering Nina's 10th call, came stumbling out in pajama pants and a windbreaker, objecting loudly to the idea of anyone damaging the vending machine until Marcy cut him off with a level stare and said, "If something dies trapped back there because you're worried about your soda contracts, I promise that will become the least expensive part of your week." That settled him. The challenge was doing the rescue without sending the bobcat into a panic charge or a blind escape into the parking lot full of people. Deputy Pike moved everyone except essential personnel back behind the caution signs. Tom, to his visible disappointment, was included in everyone, though he still hovered close enough to see. Under the new work lights, the scene looked even stranger. A weather-worn motel stairwell, a humming soda machine, a wild bobcat standing its ground among extension cords and boots and flashlights, refusing to leave because something on the other side of that metal box mattered more than fear. Marcy crouched and spoke in a soft, even voice, as if calming a skittish horse. "All right, sweetheart, we're going to move it. Don't do anything dramatic." The bobcat's ears flicked toward her. Its chest rose and fell fast, but it did not bolt. Two firefighters eased the vending machine forward, using the dolly and pry bar, inch by inch, careful not to tip it. Dust shook loose from behind it in gray plumes. A crushed paper cup rolled out, then a nest of leaves. Then when the machine had shifted just far enough, the beam of Deputy Pike's flashlight slipped into the hidden cavity. Everybody leaned. At first, Nina saw only pipes and shadow. Then something moved. A tiny face appeared between two conduit lines, mouth open, eyes glazed with fear. A bobcat kitten. Behind it, pressed into the far corner of the recess, another small shape trembled. "Oh my God," Nina whispered. The adult bobcat made a sound that seemed to tear out of it and rushed forward 2 steps before Marcy carefully angled the catch-pole barrier low across the opening, not to trap it, but to keep it from darting into the work zone. "There are babies back here," Pike called. Tom, from behind the tape, said a single stunned curse under his breath. It all made terrible sense at once. The bobcat had not been haunting the motel. It had been returning to the stairwell because the kittens were there. How they had gotten behind the vending machine was impossible to know for certain. Maybe they had been born somewhere under the motel foundation and wandered into the alcove through a broken vent. Maybe the mother had tried to den temporarily in the utility cavity and the machine had shifted during service. Maybe the kittens had followed warmth or shelter and found themselves pinned in a space too narrow to escape. But now the older bobcat, small, lean, not full-grown, did not look like their mother. Marcy saw that immediately. "Juvenile female," she murmured. "Too young to be nursing. Probably last year's offspring. Older sister, maybe." Nina looked at her. "She kept coming back for them?" Marcy nodded once. "Looks that way." The first kitten was reachable by hand once the machine moved another few inches. A firefighter in gloves slid his arm into the cavity and gently cupped the scruff and chest, withdrawing the tiny animal in a cloud of dust and cobwebs. It was filthy, underweight, and alive. Its cry was barely audible, more breath than voice. The moment it emerged, the juvenile bobcat froze. Every muscle in its body sharpened toward that one small life. Marcy's face softened despite herself. "Easy," she whispered. The kitten was placed into a towel-lined crate. The second came out after a more delicate struggle because it had wedged itself behind a pipe in blind panic. When that one was finally freed, it let out a furious hiss, no bigger than a whisper. Tom actually laughed from sheer relief. Then Deputy Pike's light caught movement deeper in the cavity. "There's another one." The third kitten was the weakest, curled almost flat against the wall, breathing in shallow stutters, dust caked around its nose. Nina felt sick looking at it. Marcy gave quick instructions, and the firefighter adjusted his angle, careful not to crush the fragile body against the utility lines. It took almost 2 minutes to bring that kitten out, though to everyone watching it felt much longer. When the third kitten finally emerged, limp but breathing, the entire parking lot seemed to release one long collective breath. No one had realized how completely they were all holding it. The juvenile bobcat paced in a tight circle, eyes locked on the crate. When Marcy judged the moment right, she had the others step back. Then she set the crate down on the concrete several feet from the machine and opened the outer grate just enough for scent and touch without allowing the kittens to crawl out. The bobcat approached slowly, not because it wanted to, because every instinct in its body still screamed that humans were danger. Yet it came anyway, drawn by something stronger. It reached the crate, sniffed frantically, then touched each kitten with its nose through the opening, one by one, counting them, checking them, reassuring itself they were all there. Then it began grooming the nearest kitten with fast, urgent strokes through the bars. Nina had seen enough difficult things in her life to mistrust easy sentiment, but that moment hit her so hard she had to turn away and pretend she was watching the fire crew coil extension cords. Tom did not bother pretending. "Jesus," he said softly, "she's been asking for help all night." Marcy made a call to the Regional Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The kittens were too weak to leave on site, and the juvenile was stressed, dehydrated, and likely scraped raw from repeated attempts to reach them. Transporting all four together would be safest if they could manage it. The usual process for a wild bobcat would have involved distance, barriers, chemical restraint if needed. But this scene had rewritten the rules. Once the kittens were secured in the travel crate, the juvenile refused to move more than a few feet from them. She paced, crouched, and returned, again and again. Marcy took a calculated risk. She positioned a larger kennel adjacent to the kitten crate, connected by a narrow transfer opening. Then everyone backed away into stillness. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. The bobcat stood rigid, caught between fear of confinement and refusal to abandon the kittens. Wind hissed through the pines. The motel sign buzzed. Somewhere down the highway, an 18-wheeler moaned through the dark. Then the smallest kitten cried. The juvenile went in at once. The gate slid shut. Nobody cheered. It did not feel like that kind of victory. It felt quieter, sharper, the kind that humbles people more than excites them. The wildlife rehab team from Cedar Valley arrived just after midnight. Dr. Elise Warren, the center's director, examined the kittens in the back of the transport van while Marcy gave a rapid summary. Nina stood nearby, jacket pulled tight, suddenly bone-tired now that the crisis had cracked open into aftermath. "How bad?" she asked. Elise did not sugarcoat it. "Dehydration, exposure, dust inhalation. One has respiratory distress. But they're alive, and that gives us something to work with." She glanced toward the kennel where the juvenile bobcat crouched, eyes bright in the dark. "And that one? Seems bonded," Marcy said. "Likely sibling caretaker." Elise nodded slowly. "Then we keep them together as much as possible. Separation stress could make all of this worse." By the time the van doors closed, it was nearly 1 in the morning. The parking lot looked strangely ordinary again. The vending machine had been pulled fully aside, revealing the dark cavity behind it. The kittens were gone. The bobcat was gone. Firefighters packed tools. Deputy Pike took statements. The motel owner complained weakly about liability and was ignored by everyone with actual work to do. Tom lingered near the office door as Nina locked up for the night. "You were right," he said. She gave him a tired look. "About what?" "It wasn't haunting the stairwell." Despite everything, a laugh escaped her. "No, I guess not." He glanced toward the now empty alcove. "You think it knew what it was doing?" Nina slid the deadbolt into place and looked out across the cold, dim lot. "I think it knew something was wrong," she said, "and I think it refused to leave." That story should have ended there, but it didn't. The next morning, after 4 hours of sleep and too much coffee, Nina got a call from Dr. Elise Warren. "All 3 kittens made it through the night," she said. "Still fragile. The smallest is touch and go, but stable for now. And the juvenile female settled only when she was placed where she could hear and smell them." "Female?" "Yes. About 10 months old, we think. Too young to be their mother. Most likely an older sister from an earlier litter. Thin, scraped up, exhausted, but otherwise healthy." Nina sat back in her chair. She kept coming to the motel for them. That appears to be exactly what happened. In the days that followed, the story escaped the property and spread through Alder Creek faster than motel gossip usually had any right to. A guest had recorded part of the rescue from the second-floor walkway. Someone posted a blurry still image of the bobcat beside the vending machine with the caption, "She wouldn't leave because her babies were behind it." People immediately corrected the biology in the comments, "Sister, not mother." But the emotion of the story stayed the same. The town fell hard for it. Local news called it remarkable. Social media called it heartbreaking. One station ran the headline, "Bobcat returns to Motel Stairwell until trapped kittens are found." Nina hated the attention and refused every interview request. Tom gave one anyway, standing beside his sedan in the motel parking lot and retelling the moment he heard breathing behind the vending machine with the solemn gravity of a man who had finally stumbled into the best story of his life. At Cedar Valley, the situation remained delicate. The kittens were younger than initially thought, barely old enough to be mobile, and had suffered enough dust exposure that lung complications remained a risk. The juvenile female, whom the staff nicknamed Echo because she had kept returning night after night, proved just as unusual in rehabilitation as she had at the motel. She would not tolerate people, which was good for any hope of eventual release. But she also became severely distressed when separated too long from the kittens. Whenever one cried during treatment, she answered from the adjacent enclosure with a low, rasping chirrup. Whenever the staff moved the nest box farther away for cleaning, she paced until it was returned. "She's babysitting them," one technician said. Elise, who had spent 23 years in wildlife medicine and had little patience for sentimentality, only replied, "She's regulating them, and maybe herself." The smallest kitten crashed on day 3. It stopped feeding and went limp with exhaustion, its breathing shallow and irregular. Elise moved it to oxygen support and started emergency treatment. The other 2 kittens cried continuously from the warmed enclosure, and Echo threw herself once against the divider hard enough to bloody her shoulder. Then Elise made a decision she would later describe as equal parts medicine and instinct. She shifted the oxygen chamber within sightline of Echo. The result was immediate. The juvenile bobcat flattened herself beside the clear side panel and began making the soft, repetitive churring sounds staff had now come to recognize. The kitten, who had been barely responsive, twitched, lifted its head, and within the hour accepted a small assisted feeding. Nobody in the treatment room said much after that. They all just worked. Over the next 3 weeks, the family stabilized. The kittens gained weight, their bellies rounded, their fur smooth from dust-stiffened gray to warm tawny spotted coats. The stronger two began wrestling. The weakest one, though smaller, developed a sharp little hiss and a fierce determination that made the technicians laugh under their masks. Echo changed too. Once her scratches healed and the edge of starvation passed, she became sleeker, more composed, less frantic, but never indifferent. Every morning she checked each kitten. Every evening she settled only when all three were curled where she could see them. For wildlife professionals, that bond mattered beyond emotion. It meant the kittens were learning from their own kind, staying wild, orienting socially and behaviorally in ways humans could never properly imitate. If all went well, release as a family group might actually be possible. At the motel, meanwhile, things changed in smaller ways. The vending machine was removed and the alcove behind it opened up, cleaned, and sealed. A broken vent near the foundation was discovered behind the cinder block wall, just wide enough for small animals to access the cavity from beneath the building. The owner, after some pressure from county officials and a great deal of public embarrassment, finally repaired it. The burned-out stairwell light was replaced. Guests checked in mostly because of highway convenience, but more than one asked for the Bobcat stairwell room. Nina hated that phrase and started deliberately assigning those guest rooms on the opposite side of the property. Tom Weller checked out 2 days after the rescue but sent a postcard a month later. On the front was a photograph of some nameless desert highway at sunset. On the back he had written only, "Still listening when something sounds wrong." Nina kept it in the cash drawer for reasons she never fully examined. By early winter, Cedar Valley's assessments were encouraging. Echo remained appropriately wary of humans. The kittens were developing hunting play, stalking behaviors, and increasing independence. Elise selected a remote release site in protected foothill territory, far from motels, roads, and soda machines. The plan was a soft release in late December if weather held. The morning of the transfer was hard, blue cold. Frost edged the chain-link fencing at the rehab center. Pine needles cracked under boots. Nina had not expected to be invited, but Elise called anyway. "You were the first one who listened," she said. So Nina drove out before dawn. Morrissey from Animal Services was there too, along with one technician and a volunteer driver. No reporters, no public spectators. Just a small group of tired people standing in the brittle quiet while breath smoked in the air. The crates were loaded into the truck. They drove for more than an hour into rising country, where the roads narrowed and the forest thickened, and the world began to look like it had not changed for a very long time. At the release site, the snow was patchy, the underbrush dense, the silence immense. Elise positioned the crates facing the tree line. "Echo first," she said. The door opened. The juvenile bobcat came out like a shadow resolving into muscle and fur. She stopped immediately, nostrils wide, reading the air. Then she turned, not fleeing, not vanishing, just waiting. One by one, the kittens were released. The biggest bounded clumsily into the brush and then stopped, startled by its own freedom. The second stayed close to Echo's flank. The smallest emerged last, blinking in the pale winter sun, stronger now than any of them had dared hope weeks earlier. Echo did not leave until all three were out. Then she moved, not fast, not dramatic, just with the quiet certainty of something returning to the life it had been pulled away from. She slipped into the brush, paused once to look back as the kittens gathered themselves, then continued up the slope with all three following in a loose, uncertain line until the trees swallowed them whole. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Marcy let out a breath and said, "Well." Nina looked at the empty crates, the dark woods, the place where 4 small lives had disappeared back into the world they belonged to. She thought of the stairwell, the flickering lights, the soda machine humming in the dark, and the sound of breathing behind metal that should have meant nothing to anyone. She thought of a frightened young bobcat returning again and again to a place that smelled of humans and oil and stale sugar because something she loved was trapped there. "She knew," Nina said softly. Elise, standing beside her, with gloved hands in her coat pockets, gave a small nod. She knew they were there, she said, and she knew leaving wasn't an option. Long after that, guests still asked about the story when they checked into Pine Ridge Motor Lodge. Some had heard a version from the internet. Others only knew that a wildcat had once brought people to the vending machine for a rescue. Nina never told it the dramatic way other people did. She simply said there had been kittens and a bobcat that wouldn't give up, and that sometimes the wild comes close not because it wants us, but because it runs out of other choices. And on quiet nights when the wind moved through the pines behind the motel and the stairwell lights threw long yellow bars over the concrete, Nina sometimes paused at the office window and looked toward the far corner of the lot. The vending machine was gone now. The alcove had been sealed. The place looked ordinary again, but she never passed it without listening, because once in the middle of an unremarkable roadside night, a guest heard breathing behind a vending machine, and a young bobcat stayed long enough for humans to understand what it had been trying to say all along.